Good evening, bike girls and bike guys. It is Bike Guy Alex back with another tier list video. Now, my first tier list video was quite controversial, and this tier list video might be just as controversial. Today, we are going to be drinking some beverages while we do this tier list. I have some Ashai Super Dry on tap for tonight. Got a couple extras right off camera to help really fuel this tier list that I'm going to do. I would first like to start off and say that although I am making a tier list, and I'm basically saying not all vintage mountain bikes are created equal, all vintage mountain bikes are cool in their own way. And how you decide to build them up makes it even cooler and personalized to you. So just because I might say something that you don't agree with, or maybe I say something about your personal bike that you actually have, don't take it to heart. This is just a little fun video I'm putting together, having some beers, having a good time. So don't take anything too seriously. Don't take anything to heart. We're just having fun here. And, without further ado, crack open your beers and let's have some fun reviewing some bikes and doing a tier list. It's a good beer. All right, sweet. So running through, let me get this out of here. Running through the tiers that we're going to be looking at today. We have obviously the S tier, God tier. Anything in that tier, goated forever. Then below that, A and B tier. If you find your bike in there, that's a good tier to be in. Below that, then we're getting into, some shaky waters. We got the can't wheelie tier. If you can't wheelie, it's pretty embarrassing. However, there are still some people out there that are really cool that can't wheelie. So it's understandable, but it is quite embarrassing. Not a great tier to be in. Below that, we have the seized seat post. All of you out there that have worked on bikes and have come across a seized seat post know how much that sucks. So obviously, not a great tier to be in. And then finally, the worst tier on the board is shitted and peed pants. A little bit of pee in your pants is always okay, but when you add in the shit, it's not pleasant, and that's really not a tier we want to be in. So those are the tiers we're working with. Now let's jump into the bikes and start ranking them. So first up, we have Giant vintage mountain bikes. We will be looking at all of these bikes kind of as a whole and not really picking out specific frames, and just looking at the brand as a whole and what they're able to create as vintage mountain bikes, looking at 80s, 90s, maybe creeping into the early 2000s. I don't really think I have any early 2000s bikes on here, but in case there is a slip up, some early 2000s that is still vintage according to the dictionary definition. So we're going to be looking at the brands as a whole. So Giant, on screen here we have the Giant ATX in a couple of different models. Up here we have the Giant Cold Call and Granite, I believe, down here. And this one also might be a Cold Call as well. So looking at these frames, paint jobs, aesthetics, all of those things, that's what we're going to get into, because ultimately going down to the component set, weight and things like that is just too tedious for me and something that I don't want to do. So we're just going to look at it from a pure aesthetics point of view. So Giant, they came out with some cool bikes. Their 80s and 90s versions had some really, really unique colorways. I really love the Giant Granite / Cold Call with these really, really awesome 90s colorways and these shapes that broke up this gradient color on the frame. Really, really cool. Really good design there as well. Even in the ATX, this gradient from black to green, and having that green speckle in there. Really cool. And even on their more basic colorways, uh, still a really clean, good looking bike. So nothing really to complain about. Nothing also that really hits these bikes out of the park. And nothing that truly tickles my fancy. So looking at the Giant vintage mountain bike as a whole, we're going to put them straight into the B tier. I do really like the Cold Call. Those little like shapes in the gradient pattern there, really cool. Big kudos to Giant for doing that. But nothing too amazing about them. So we are going to put that in the B tier there. Moving on to potentially the most controversial take that I have all video. We're going to be looking at GT bikes. Now, my personal opinion, GT bikes are overhyped. I laugh because I was an individual who overhyped them as well. I thought that these were the coolest bikes on the internet. I loved them. I saw them on Instagram every single day. About every like 3 posts I would swipe through, it was another GT build, and I loved it. I thought they looked so cool, and I dreamed about having a GT of my own. As I've gotten into this whole YouTube thing and the bike world a little bit deeper, I've kind of realized how overplayed this whole GT thing is. And I'm kind of over it. So, although the GT might have some of the coolest frame designs as well as coolest paint jobs, I don't even know how to say this frame's name. I'm going to take a wild swing at it. The Karakoram, whatever, has probably the coolest paint design out there for a retro mountain bike. I mean, this purple one, it's gorgeous. It is literally probably my favorite paint job that I've seen on a bike. But I see it so much, and it's getting to the point where it's so repetitive and nothing new, and everybody builds them up the same way, putting on the Stridsland moto bars, and some really thick tires and things like that. And I mean, nothing against it because they do look good, but it's just so overplayed to the point where I'm not really into them anymore. Um, and I mean, with all of that being said, if I had the opportunity to pick up one of these bikes for a good price, I absolutely would. So, although, as we run over here to the tier list, although I am going to put them in the can't wheelie tier, I would still buy one, build one up, probably just like everybody else builds them up. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. They go in the can't wheelie tier because obviously they're probably the coolest bike out there for retro mountain bikes, but I think they're just overplayed, and because of that, they can't rank any higher than the can't wheelie tier. They're just so overplayed. Gorgeous bikes, the Karakoram, Timberline, beautiful, beautiful bikes. The Pantera, not my favorite, but the other two, Chef's Kiss, beautiful bikes, but they're just everywhere, and it's just so overplayed. I'm over it. Let's see something new, guys. Come on. I want to see some new, cool, unique bikes out there. And I think the GT is just overhyped at this point. So it's got to go in the can't wheelie tier. It's got to. A little bit of a beer break, and then let's keep rolling. All right. So, as I alluded to earlier, literally previously, I used to think GTs were the coolest bike out there. And I was like, that's my dream bike. I feel as if I've had some sort of revelation and I've become more sophisticated with my bike perception and bike knowledge. And that's why when we move on to this beautiful, beautiful Cannondale M700 vintage mountain bike, and I've really grown to love this frame. Um, the Cannondales are just so beautiful. Looking at a lot of the other bikes that came out around this time frame, a lot of them had skinnier tubing on the frame. And I've grown to really love how thick the tubing is on these Cannondales. I think it just looks so good. And then you go into even the smaller details and what they're really known for, these really nice and beautiful smooth butted joints on the frame that are just so crispy clean that, on other bikes you don't see as well. You don't really see anything this smooth on any of the other vintage mountain bikes. So because of that, because of how beautiful these frames are, and obviously this is a much more sophisticated opinion, because you can argue that the GT has one of the most interesting frame designs as well as interesting paint jobs out there, and that's why it should be ranked so high versus the Cannondale, which is a very basic bike. But at its core, it's just so beautiful. And for those reasons, the Cannondale, it's going to jump up into that S tier today. It is more of a sophisticated opinion, I would say, because on the surface level, GT screams out at you as, oh, look at me, I'm the coolest bike on the internet. But Cannondale, beautiful bike. I love it. This is my tier list, my opinions. So argue with me in the comments if you think that GT should be in S tier and Cannondale should be in the can't wheelie tier. Go ahead, argue it with me. You're not going to win because this is my opinion. So, beautiful. On to the next bike. We have the amazingly beautiful Specialized Rockhopper. Now, I said we weren't going to get into specific frames. So I'll loop in, 90 Specialized hard rock as well. I don't think the Stump Jumper was out in the 90s, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. We got the Stump Jumper as well in there. But I'll loop those in there, although all the pictures on screen right now are of Rockhoppers. I do have to say, 90s Specialized bikes, something else. They are so beautiful. My favorite thing about these bikes comes down to the decals and colorways. I mean, they don't get any better than a 90s Specialized bike. This colorway is just so beautiful. The yellow and like lavender, gorgeous. Over here, red and black, gorgeous, always works. Then looking at some of the older ones, the 80s Specialized Rockhopper down here, beautiful paint job, super iconic too. This is probably the most famous one that you'll see of the Specialized Rockhopper. So, another gorgeous, gorgeous paint job and colorway. And these bikes just, are so beautiful. Um, there really isn't much else to say to the Specialized Rockhopper than that. Love the decals. Do have to say the Specialized logo, that like little lightning bolt S, beautiful from a design artistic perspective, so good. So Specialized, it's going to go in that A tier. It's a really, really beautiful bike. Love the decals, love the logos, love the colorways. Can't really go wrong with a Specialized mountain bike, especially a vintage one. All right, next up we have the Trek vintage mountain bike. Overall, I do think that Trek as a brand in the 90s did a lot of, I'm going to do what Specialized is doing. I mean, looking at these frames, they're nothing really unique to them, right? You know, we saw similar colorways, similar, you know, things on the mountain bike as the Giant mountain bikes, as the Specialized mountain bikes. And Trek being founded as Specialized was founded prior to Trek being founded. Right here in my notes, it says Specialized was founded in 1974 and Trek was founded 2 years later in 1976. Really screams that Trek was that copycat for Specialized. I mean, you can see it basically in how these bikes were, you know, designed. I know a lot of 90s mountain bikes, same geometry, similar paint colors, things like that. But none of this really screams out to me as, hey, this was, you know, my super original idea. And being 2 years after Specialized, you got to give Specialized the I was here first bonus, and Trek as that I'm a follower and I'm going to do what is already cool. And so because Trek just kind of comes off as that follower brand to Specialized, they're going to go into the seized seat post tier. Now, I do have to say that I have built up a Trek for my lovely girlfriend back when we lived in the US, and it was a gorgeous bike. It came out really nice. My girlfriend loved it. It was beautiful, and I was super stoked on the bike in general. But if I had the preference and choice and ability to choose between building up a Trek or a Specialized, I'm choosing a Specialized every single day. I don't think Treks are that cool. They give off that copycat vibe, and I'm not about it. So, Trek is going in seized seat post tier. Okay? Sweet. Got to open another beer. All right, we're back. I don't have a bottle opener, so I'll put in the clip of me opening my first beer of the episode. But I don't have a bottle opener, so you got to bang it against things. And, well, I didn't want to damage the desk, so went outside to go bang it against some other things. Sweet, let's make sure the mic's still on, and let's keep going. Oh my gosh. Somebody's got to make a compilation of all my burps. That's going to be me. I'm going to do that. Sick. So, next bike. Kona. Guys, this bike flew under my radar. This brand even flew under my radar for such a long time. I feel like I never really looked at or appreciated how beautiful Konas were until I watched a Toasty Rides video of him building up a Kona. I think it was a lava dome. Not 100% sure. Shout out Toasty Rides. Shout out Gary's Project. Shout out Ben Cycles, the three main people that got me into bikes and building bikes and doing all this fun stuff. So big shout out to those guys. But on to the Kona, guys. This is an absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous bike. Um, Again, we're looking at a more simplistic bike. It's not something with the craziest paint jobs out there and things like that. But this is just such a beautiful bike. The vintage Konas are gorgeous. The one thing that I do really like about the Konas are this more aggressive frame geometry. With a lot of the other bikes, we see a much more relaxed frame geometry, right? Much flatter top tube up here. Coming down to the Kona, you get that downward slanting top tube for a bit more of an aggressive frame style, which is really cool because this isn't, this wasn't something that the other brands were doing at the time. So this was unique. And obviously, as we look more towards modern day bikes, we see a lot more of this aggressive frame style for actual mountain bikes, full suspension mountain bikes, and things like that. But I just think it's really cool to see this in an older bike. So that's the first thing that I really like about these older Konas. The second thing that I really like about these older Konas is the color blocking, per se. You have this totally one-tone frame paired with this secondary color, stem, and fork. And I think it's just so cool. And then also to see it match, the seat post color and things like that is just really, really cool. So yeah, I really, really liked how Kona had this idea of, taking their unique spin on their bikes by doing this two-tone bike, cutting it by having that different fork color from the frame. I think that's really cool, and obviously not anything that we saw from any of the previous brands. And lastly, I gotta give it to Kona. They have a fantastic logo design on these older bikes. I mean, this one up here, so cool. I believe this one up here is a lava dome too. This lava dome up here, so cool. The way that they did that logo and that decal, almost making it look like lava. So cool. But these other Kona logos and decals look amazing as well, even just in, that plain accent color that they are here. Really reminds me and gives off like Hawaiian surfy vibe, which I really dig. So, big ups to Kona for putting that on their bikes. Big ups to Kona for a more unique frame design and more aggressive geometry with their older frames than anybody else was doing. And big ups to Kona for having a new and unique taste on the colorway, doing the two-tone color blocking in this sort of way. So, I got to rank them. So, because of all of that, I got to say, Kona's going up in the A tier. Might even be pushing S tier. We'll see after I finish this beer if I want to reorder anything, how I'm feeling. Maybe we'll push it up to the S tier by then. Okay. Rounding it out, we got one more bike left. We've got Scott Vintage Mountain Bikes. Might be a hot take. Don't know. We'll see once I post this video and how controversial it ends up being. And if anybody really hates my opinions, then we'll really know how hot my takes were. But Scott, looking at the Sawtooth here, I picked out the Sawtooth. Excuse me. I picked out the Sawtooth exclusively. I mean, not necessarily exclusively, because I could throw in some of the other older Scott mountain bike frames in here as well, but picked out the Scott Sawtooth here because it was the frame that was the most unique. The other older Scott frames, not really anything unique about them. And to compare one silver bike to another silver bike is going to get pretty boring. If you're not going to go into like the specs and details of the bike, then it's going to get pretty boring just to compare a silver bike to a silver bike and a blue bike to a blue bike and blah blah blah. So I picked out the Sawtooth because it is that more unique frame from Scott back in the 80s and 90s. Now, as it is, probably one of the more unique frames on here paint wise, it really doesn't speak to me. And if anything, it screams, I'm doing too much. This is like that bike that was trying way too hard to fit in and went over the top. And in doing so, just really does not fit in. You know what I'm saying? Even coming down to like the logos and decals, don't love the Scott logo up here. Much prefer, I mean, it's very similar to the Trek logo with how they did that, with the drop shadow there, doing a two-tone, logo with an accent color there. Very similar to the Trek one. And then you come down to even like the Sawtooth one, and I really don't like that Sawtooth decal. It just really doesn't do anything to the bike. If anything, I think it makes it look worse. The way they like cut the gradient on this bike, having like a hard black line, then white line, then going into the next color, don't really like. And you can see it on like the other ones. It's not necessarily black, white, next color, but having like two hard lines of a color into the next color, don't really like. This one up here, probably an older Scott, maybe 80s Scott Sawtooth. Like the gradient much more. I also like that it doesn't have the Sawtooth decal down here, and instead it's on the fork. I like that a lot better. But just, again, we're looking at these brands overall objectively as best as we can. And for the most part, these frames are, showing me that I'm doing too much to try to fit in. And to be honest, if you're looking at this frame to build up for yourself, because the frame is doing so much, you're going to want to do probably too much as well on top of that. And then these bikes and these builds could probably get out of hand and end up looking pretty bad. So because of that, we're going to throw the Scott in the shitted and peed pants tier. All right. Where we currently stand without potentially a reshuffle, we've got Cannondale in the top. Right below Cannondale in the A tier, we have the Kona. Next to the Kona, we have Specialized. Below Specialized, we have Giant. And then we're looking at GT in the tier below that, Trek in the tier below that, and Scott in the last tier. Thinking about these bikes a little bit more, I do think that a quick reshuffle shuffle is in order, because I don't necessarily love Giant being in the B tier. I think that it is one of those more unique frames, and there are some really cool 90s Giant frames out there, but potentially on that same level as Scott doing too much to fit in and not fitting in. I think that Giant might be, teetering on that line of doing a little bit too much with those frame designs, decals, and colors. And so because of that, I think I want to move it down to the can't wheelie tier. We're going to put it behind the GT because, again, GT, beautiful, beautiful bikes, but because they're overhyped, they have to stay in that tier. I think that to, give the Kona the justice that it really deserves, it does deserve to be up in that S tier, so we're going to jump it up into the S tier for just how gorgeous of a bike that is, and it deserves to be up there. The last beer is talking to me. It's making me fall in love with that bike even more, so we got to throw it up there. And with that, I'm really happy with how this tier list has come out. I think I did every bike justice enough. I know a lot of people are going to be not stoked that the GT is in the can't wheelie tier, but you just got to understand that it's overplayed at this point. It's the only bike you really see on the internet. I want to see some cool Konas and cool Cannondales out there. I don't want to see the GT every 4 or 5 posts on my Instagram feed. I want to see some other bikes. And so, with all of that being said, that's going to do it for this video. I would like to say thank you guys so much for watching, sticking around, watching all my content. If you want to subscribe, please do. I'm going to be making content for the foreseeable future. Lots of more bike content to come. Cheers, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.